Welcome back to the Warrior Servant Leader podcast. I'm your host, Pat Welsh. Today we have an awesome guest. She was so kind to have me on her podcast a few weeks back, and I said, Wanda, I got to get you on here, and we're going to have a great conversation. So today's guest is Wanda Marie Thibodeaux, a professional Christian author, ghostwriter, and podcast host. She helps individuals and organizations communicate with clarity and purpose while also offering original devotional films, essays, and reflections that support those carrying unseen emotional weight in their leadership journey. As a trauma survivor, Wanda is helping people reclaim joy as part of her calling. And her latest book, Grace in the Grind, 52 Devotions for Thriving in the Workplace, expands on her podcast, and I'm going to give you that link here shortly, into a full weekly reflections for deep, intentional spiritual growth. And in talking with Wanda, I've come to learn that one of her biggest goals is to help people think and love again despite all the tough circumstances they're going through. Wanda, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. I'm glad to be here.
Oh man, so this thinking and loving again, despite the circumstances which can really shatter your ability to think clearly and not with all the emotion and be able to love again despite circumstances. What's that look like, and how'd you get into that arena?
Sure. Well, basically, the premise behind that is, when you've gone through really hard stuff, there's a side of it where, you are feeling really, really deeply. Like it's hard, and part of the reason why people stay in their heads a lot is because that is so painful. But at the same time, you have to be thinking, you have to be able to, see new perspectives, or you cannot get better and you cannot think differently to deal with the emotions. So, really, what I'm trying to do is kind of marry the two and say you have to be able to use your cognitive side and you also have to acknowledge what you are feeling at the same time. Both of those things very much connect to how you relate to faith and to God and how you heal. So my as you had mentioned in the intro, my premise is all about helping people connect those two things so that they can feel the joy of God again. That's my mission.
Oh, that's awesome. That's one of the things I've learned, and I don't have the degree in psychology, but being a cop and lawyer for so many years, you kind of
Mm.
almost become self-taught.
Yeah,
And
for sure.
one of the things I learned is that we hear in stereo, we remember in video, but we
Mhm.
think in questions. And I had a doctor on a few weeks back. He goes, "There's research out there that you have 50,000 thoughts a day,
Mhm.
and
Yep.
about 80% of them tend to be negative."
Yeah, yeah.
Uh, and so, how what do you do actually? In your speaking, in your writing, and in your coaching, what are some of the things that you do to get people to think differently when they're going through tough times?
Well, the first thing that I would say is, and I've said this to other people in different places, but the word also is a beautiful word. When you have gone through really tough stuff or there are circumstances that you're, working against, we tend to lapse into black and white thinking. And that can be a very, in a way, a good protective mechanism at the time. But then again, it can kind of restrict us from seeing other perspectives. So I really try to tell people, if you do nothing else, integrate that word into what you are thinking mentally, even in your conversations with people. If you have to, because you might have your view of what happened, that is, quote, your truth.
Hmm.
But what else is also true? Because 9 times out of 10, there's other things that can coexist at the same time. And so the idea is that you need to learn to consider the alternatives so that you see the big picture. When we can't see that big picture, we can make kind of not so great decisions about ourselves, our others, or our others, and the even, what we want to do with work, personal life. So it can get really jumbled really fast if if you don't have all those pieces and you're not considering all those things. So that would definitely be the first thing I would say.
Wow. It kind of reminds me, what you're sharing kind of reminds me of Job. How Job had, I mean, he lost everything, and he has his three friends that are trying to get him to admit it's somehow his fault, but he thinks differently, and doesn't ever ask, why me, but he does say to God, if we could get into a court of law, I would, stand up and defend myself, kind of
Right.
deal. So that his whole thought process was completely different than his three friends.
hmm
And that kind of sounds like what you're talking about, is that you have to intentionally get yourself to think about your circumstances differently than your initial emotional reaction. Is that
Right. Because a lot of times, again, when you are going through hard stuff, you're like I said, your brain gets protective. And one of the things
Mhm.
that it does is it says, I have to interpret this a certain way to stay safe. And so by retraining yourself for that word also, or yes, and, you
Yeah,
can, however you want to put
yeah,
it, you're basically forcing yourself to say, wait a minute. I know this is my knee jerk reaction conclusion that I came to, but let me
yeah,
just pause here and just think this through because maybe I'm missing something. Maybe you're not, but you at least want to consider it. Right. And then when you bring up Job, like what I can say there is you are absolutely right in that, he was praising God. And yet at the same time, it was true that his friends were not giving him the best advice, but
hmm
my view of that is, in terms of the word also, it was true that he had lost everything, but it was also true that God was sovereign. Those two things coexisted at the same time.
hmm
You can't reject either one. So, his friends are coming along and all they're focusing on the fact is, well, you must have done something wrong.
yeah,
That was their, black and white thinking. That's it. And he's like, no, the Lord gives, the Lord takes away. So he saw the other side of it, even though he was living the loss. So that's kind of what I'm getting at.
yeah. No, and he even actually came right out and said, "God is God, and I am not."
Yep.
And
Yep.
and he was verbalizing his emotions and what he was thinking to his friends. And then another one. These are all just racist. Like I'm having these squirrel moments, I guess. Uh, is look at Jonah,
Yeah.
who tried to run away from God and not be obedient because in his mind the people of Nineveh didn't deserve God's mercy, and
hmm
that's how he was thinking. And how often do you find, quite frankly, that which now gives me another. That's why I call these open mic nights, kind of deal, because I don't have any scripted questions.
Sure.
But the whole concept of forgiveness, how
hmm
does forgiveness fit into the mindset and the mission that you have for people to, think again and love again despite their circumstances?
That's a really good question. Um, I would say the first thing is that when you get into that black and white thinking and you have convinced yourself that that is the reality, you become locked into us versus them very quickly. So if
Hmm.
something has happened to you, you are the victim, they are the perpetrator or whatever. And so that kind of stops you from saying, yes, they did all these things to me, but what led them to that? What were they thinking? Like you're not considering any of that. And I'm not saying that that excuses anything that they did.
Hmm.
I'm just saying there is always roots underneath behavior, and understanding what those roots are can kind of help you consider them in a different way, that like it's not just about them, it's about like their whole infrastructure of what they grew up with, what they experienced, like it's bigger than they are. And so that kind of takes the weight off of just them, and it kind of helps you see their bigger picture, their bigger story. And I think once you start to do that, and the same is true for you, like you have a bigger picture story too that they need to consider too. So when you're talking about forgiving yourself or forgiving others, like you really need to consider like the bigger picture that is involved, because it's not just about that one person. And if you can think a little bit that way, then it helps you to start asking questions. What did happen? Why are you doing this? Like what do you need? I think is one of the most important questions, because a lot of times people lash out or they do bad things because they're not getting their own needs met, and they don't know how to verbalize that. They don't know how to say that they're hurt, right? So they just lash out or do whatever. So it's really important that we really, again, just see that bigger picture and consider what else might be going, so that you let go of it's just me versus them.
Excellent points. Again, here we go. You know, another squirrel just ran by. Is
That's okay.
Chris Voss, one of the premier hostage negotiators in the history of the FBI, wrote a book called "Never Split the Difference," and I'm connecting it to what you're sharing is that as a hostage negotiator, he has learned and identified that every human being wants four things. They want safety, they want security, they want prosperity, and they want control.
Yep.
And from your point is, and I'm going to add to that you made a really good thing about it doesn't justify somebody's behavior towards you. However, if you can at least visualize, okay, they were driven by, was it safe? Their safety was threatened, their security was threatened, their prosperity, or their control, their need for control over themselves or over their circumstances. It does take the stress and the blame game out of it, but at the same time, and again, I'm going back to scripture, and a friend that was on our podcast about 4 months ago. This is his exact words: that sometimes you just have to let Judas walk, and Jesus knew exactly. He knew every reason why Judas did what he did, but he didn't. He didn't condemn him. He didn't correct him. He didn't stop him. He let Judas walk, and Judas then suffered the natural consequences of what he had done and why he had done it. And sometimes you just have to do that. And I think in a way, when you let somebody walk, that's a form of forgiveness, that you're not bearing that weight on your shoulders of why did they do this to me, because you may never know the reason why,
Right.
and you can never. So that was my squirrel moment of connecting your mission and vision to a famous hostage negotiator, that
Yeah.
you both are identifying the same things in your perspectives, that you and helping people heal is driven by them healing in one or all of those four categories.
Sure.
So
Yeah.
that's
Well, one thing I will add too, to that, I'm talking about this bigger picture, but one thing that I really want to emphasize I think is important is that you don't necessarily need to see all of their big picture. You might see only like this little tiny slice.
mhm.
So you don't necessarily need all of the why. You don't need to see all of the roots. All I'm asking people to do is to consider that there are roots. You know what I mean? Like that, to understand that there is something there. Because even if you can just get to that place, you don't necessarily have to have all the answers to start to let it go, is all what I'm saying.
And if this is out of bounds, just say so.
That's okay.
But you are a trauma survivor, and I don't know your story, and I don't know how much of that story you would even want to share. And taking into our conversation the perspective of you have been there as a trauma survivor. So this is not simply book knowledge, or
Right.
it's experiential. Yeah. How long did it take you, or what steps did you individually go through to be able to say, "Hey, I'm a trauma survivor"? Because there's a lot of trauma victims, if you want to call it that, trauma impacted
Yeah.
people out there that don't see themselves as a survivor, that they
Mhm.
can't get over whatever it is. My point is, what can you share with us about what you went through, as much as you want to or not want to,
Sure.
and what was the process that you personally went through to reach that? Hey, I'm a survivor.
Sure. Well, the Cliff Notes version of the story is basically, my dad, he had a real problem with alcohol, which then led to, there was violence in the home, saw a lot of things I shouldn't have. But, essentially that really strained the relationship that I had with my dad. There was a lot of stuff that went on. Um, and so it was just really an unsafe environment, to be quite honest. Um, but many years after I had left that house, and he was raised Catholic, so he was teaching us about God, and yet at the same time telling us basically that there was something wrong with us, that God essentially, was looking down on us in not so great light because we
Mm-hmm.
weren't obeying him, right? So there was kind of this, the authority kind of got warped there. And so later on, I went to church with my husband and my kids. And when I was back home, I tell this story a lot actually. But they had pulled out the old hymn, Just As I Am, which for years, if you don't know, was the old Billy Graham altar call hymn.
Yeah.
And so for years, I had thought, because of everything that my dad had said, there's got to be something wrong with me, right? How can I
Mm-hmm.
come to God just as I am? Like that, like warped my brain. I couldn't understand that. And so I kind of understood that my dad was wrong, but then I'm like, well, how can I forgive him, right? So when I heard that hymn again, right, I don't know what in the world switched in my brain, but something did. And I just had this kind of moment where I'm like, it's not about, you know, my dad being able to come to God just as he was. Although that was true. Like that was a moment where I was like, it doesn't matter what he's done. He can come to God too. God still wants him, which I was like, huh. So that was like tough to deal with too. But then within that, I'm like, it's not about who my dad is. It's about who God is. It's about God just as he is. So that was the moment that I kind of realized that I had kind of like blended the two characters, like my dad's character and and God's character, like they had gotten warped in my brain, and I couldn't extrapolate the two. But at that moment, I'm like, they're different. They like go in different directions, and that's okay. Like, so like, and then just because that was important, because that moment let me say, you know what? My dad is wrong. God is God. He's not right over here, right? On some things
Yeah.
he was, but not on a lot of stuff. So it kind of let me reframe, all the things that my dad had said about me and about God, and like just let me see God for who he was. And that was when I really started to say, you know what? It's not about my dad. It's not about like, and then I kind of started seeing him. Well, if God can still accept him, shouldn't I?
Yeah. Yeah.
Again, it's not excusing anything that he did. It's just saying, if I'm gonna model God, if I'm gonna be a follower of God, shouldn't I at least try to forgive like he does? Try to see my dad as, a child of God the way that he is, the way that God sees him. So then that kind of just like, yeah, so like things started to kind of soften. Then still took a while, like a long time. Um, but that was kind of the moment where I just kind of shifted my view of things. So
Wow. So now I'll give you a different squirrel, different character. So
sure.
it's that's kind of your Saul, aka Paul, moment without
Yeah.
actually getting physically knocked off a horse and blinded.
Mhm.
But that moment of clarity of, when Christ said to him, "Why are you persecuting?" I mean, the risen Christ says to him, "Why are you persecuting?" He's killing
Mm-hmm.
Christians in the name of Judaism,
Yeah.
and then he had that revelation moment, a very dramatic one. You know, your light clicked from a song. His mind clicked from literally getting knocked off a horse and
Yeah.
blinded, and then how the Christian community and the other apostles had to come to accept Paul
Mm-hmm.
as indeed a changed person,
Yeah.
and that whole process. It's very, what we go through is very akin to all of salvation history
Yeah.
of folks. So that that's fascinating. I'm glad to hear your story because
Yeah.
we've never really dove into it. Um, Tell us about your two books.
Oh,
The
sure.
and where can people get them?
Yeah. So the one that I have just released is a devotional. It's 52 weeks. So that is geared toward professionals, any level. It's not geared to any one profession. So anybody who wants to, basically my podcast is all about aligning work and faith. I really want people to be able to live out their values and their beliefs about God in the workplace as much as is reasonable and you can, right?
Mm-hmm.
So this devotional is basically focused on how do you align those two things? How do you get your faith integrated to actually be practical in the workplace? Like, how do you reconcile those two things? So it's got your regular devotionals, but then it's got some reflection questions. And something that's a little bit unique about it is that it also has a challenge for every single week. That again is like very practical, that gets you to kind of think outside the box just to kind of integrate it in a very action oriented way because professionals, they're go-getters, they're doers, right? So giving them something to do every week that can kind of apply what I'm talking about. So that's that in a nutshell, and that is available on Amazon and most other real retailers as well.
And the name of that book is
Oh, Grace in the Grind: 52
great.
Devotions for
Okay.
Thriving in the Workplace. Yep.
And then are you still doing the Joyful God? Is that one out too now, or are you still
That is
working on that?
not released yet,
Okay.
but okay. So,
Okay.
so this is fun. So the idea of joyful God, that is this idea that again, with trauma, that can really break the connection that you have with joy. Like it just makes it fizzle. And the problem with that is if you have Christian doctrine, God is supposed to be a joyful God, right? That's what Christian
Mhm.
doctrine teaches. God of love, God of joy. But if you lose your connection with joy and you really struggle to feel that, everything that you think about the Christian faith, everything that you think about God is going to be kind of gray and sawdust because you can't feel it. So the whole idea is how do we get that connection back and really see that he is a joyful God. He's not like the people that might have treated you badly. This is who
Mhm.
he really is. How do you reconnect to that? And basically really acknowledging a lot of the stuff that goes on in your head after you've been through trauma and counterweighting it to say, you know what, this is why that doesn't make logical sense. And here's how to deal with the emotions behind it. So that's what the structure of this book is. But this is why I kind of laugh about it because over the past couple of weeks, this has ballooned in my brain to a 5-book series. So this is going to be like the next 10 years of my life. We'll see. But they all relate to that in some way. So this joy idea of how do we, look at that. So whether it's from the neurological side, that'll be one of them, the cultural side. So really pulling this deep and going into that and to really help people explore how do we recover and how not just from the trauma, but like how do we restore our faith? And those two things I think are very much intertwined for a lot of people.
Wow. And we're recording this. It's not going to drop. For a little while, just because
Sure.
of timing. But we're actually recording this, and we are a week from Christmas Eve,
Mhm.
and and all that joyfulness that is with Christmas. And then next year, the next big one is we're going to go into the time of Easter. And you talk about losing your joy, the apostles and Mary, Good Friday, but the joy return that Easter Sunday, and that's
Mhm.
how I think it's really difficult. At least for me, it is to not simply rely on the emotions that we have. Remember the song "Don't Worry, Be Happy."
Yeah.
Oh, you should be joyful, and we we tie that to more of a, I don't want to say ego, but it's a emotional roller coaster, when in reality the joy you're talking about, from the Christian joy perspective, is eternal. It's, if you go
Mhm.
back to Jeremiah, I knew you before you were formed in the womb, and I consecrated you before you were born. God knew you and loved you. That's what the word "knew" means in the Old Testament. I knew you, I loved you before you were formed in the womb. That we should find great joy in that God has been, before we even existed,
Right.
knew us and loved us. And the internal joy that we'll have for eternity. So
Yeah.
that's great. And I know for you, doing a five book series, you're actually very successful. Your life before podcasting, and it's still part of your life.
Yeah.
You're a ghostwriter. You've been published in Forbes and
Mhm.
Harvard Business and whatnot.
Yeah.
How do you transition from doing that business writing to the empowerment writing that you're doing now? How how
Awkwardly.
diff awkwardly?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's actually makes more sense, than it might first appear. Because again, working with all the professionals that I did, again, like I saw that firsthand. Like, so many of them wanted to, integrate their faith beliefs, but if you know about corporate America, it's really hard sometimes to do that. Not everywhere, granted.
Mhm.
So I really saw like the pressure that they were under, and like how that was affecting them. And I'm like, this is not so great. So just looking at that, that's kind of made me feel like I needed to be doing something to help that, which is, what inspired the podcast. But in terms of like really pivoting to the Christian side, I kind of just over time, again, maybe it's just because, again, with everything that I went through and just kind of like healing from that and integrating different things in my own head and my own heart, like I started to get comfortable talking about the things that I had been through. And I like to think of myself as a systems thinker. Like I can see to the roots of things, like I said, a
Mhm.
lot. But that is one of the things that trauma also happens with a lot too. Like you notice things that other people don't always, because that's a way you stay safe too. Long story short, that has given me a very unique way of approaching things and interpreting things. So I'm able to kind of talk about my experiences and my faith and all of these things that are going on in a way that's, I think, is a little bit unique. Because as I always tell people, it is not cat poster. It is not just, okay, I'm going to make you feel good, right? It is
Yeah.
not. It is very much, we're going to sit there and face it. I'm not going to let you run. Okay.
Yeah.
But there's like there's a hardness to that in the sense that it is difficult, right? It's nobody likes to face what is painful. But at the same time, I think the fact that I've been through it and I can convey that and that I understand how it feels and that I'm try to be as clear as I can that I've been through that and I get it. Using the metaphors, using my own stories, I think that invites people in a way that kind of disarms them so that then they're willing to hear the hard stuff and they're like, "Okay, let's do this work." So that's kind of how I'm really trying to integrate the two things. Well, like I've got my business side, but then there's like the trauma writing on its own too.
Yeah. No, that's and everything you're sharing. I know a lot of our listeners out there come out of the law enforcement arena, come out of the military combat military arena, and we have listeners on all 6 continents. But the principles that you're sharing and the processes to work through the whatever the kind of trauma, and it doesn't have it doesn't have to be that you were the victim when we're talking about this stuff. I mean, like for law enforcement, 26 years, I've probably I've been on hundreds of murder scenes and dead
Yeah.
bodies scenes. That's trauma. Yeah, I'm not a
Hmm.
victim, but that's trauma that does contribute to developing those self-defense mechanisms of us versus
Yeah.
them, for your own security, for your own safety, for your own self-control. And a lot of times, those things that we develop to insulate us or to give us what we think is self-control in our circumstances aren't healthy.
Hmm.
And so everything you're sharing today, it's not just about being the victim of child abuse or some other traditional trauma, if you want to call it.
Right.
Uh, uh, and I can attest to what you're saying through some of my journey that I had somebody in the workplace that went after me and tried to get me indicted and all sorts of stuff, all for retaliation. And I was exonerated of everything in the end, but I held that anger and resentment against that person for 5 years. And they didn't know it. And even if they did, they wouldn't have cared about it. And, so I wasted 5 years of being angry because I didn't do what you're talking about, which is looking at the circumstances in a bigger
Hmm.
view and not to exonerate somebody or to minimize what they did, but for my own personal healing and moving on and being able to think and love again in a joyful way that
Yeah.
I was not having for 5 freaking years.
Yeah.
So I know this stuff works. Besides the podcast and your books, you're on Substack now, right?
Yes, I am. Yes.
Yeah. So that's cool. It's fun to write on Substack, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah.
You
Yeah.
just get to be yourself.
Hmm.
And so on Substack, that's at Wanda Thibodeaux, and so everybody understands the H is silent.
Yes.
It's not Thibodeaux, Thibodeaux on Substack, and then uh, give us the website for your podcast. What's the link for that?
Sure. So the main host is faithfulonclock.captivate.fm, but I have a main site that I've just revamped the library for that. So now I've actually integrated the podcast episodes right onto that home site. So you can just go to faithfulonclock.com. That's got the podcast episodes. It's got my videos, got my writing. Some of it is free and some of it is paid. So you can pick the tier that you want there. But the library is huge. We've got almost, I think it's coming up on 600 posts now in that library. So there's a ton of content there if you want to check that out.
Awesome. Now, can people? Is there a calendar on there that they can book if they want to talk to you more individually or in person kind of deal?
If you'd like to do that, I would recommend just contact me through LinkedIn. I'm on LinkedIn. That is the main social area that I use, but you can also email me if you really want to. It's Wanda Thibodeaux at faithfulonclock.com.
Awesome, awesome. Um, some closing thoughts. What's your big wild light bulb moment you want to share with people, or the heart of your message kind of deal?
Yeah. Well, two things. First of all, I would say that reconnecting to God and to joy, it's absolutely possible. Absolutely possible. Is it hard work? Yes. Yes, it is. But I want people to know that He's waiting for you. Like, He is waiting for you. He understands all the things that you've gone through. He's not angry with you. He'll listen to everything that has happened. He wants you to come back. Like, there's no barrier, there's no glass wall between you and Him. Because I used to think that for a long time, but there's not. It feels like there is, but there's not. So that's the first thing. The other thing that I would say, especially, to people who have gone through trauma, is I think we have this. You can correct me if I'm wrong here, Pat, because you've been through a lot too. But I think we have kind of this idea that there's almost a hierarchy to pain. Like, this trauma is worse than this one. That trauma is worse than this one, and like so on and so forth. And I say it's all pain. And the reason I say that is because perspectives differ. If one person has been through something, but they've got different coping strategies, they've got different experiences, and they're not experiencing that as harshly as another person, like that, it's not comparable. Does that make sense?
Oh, it
Like,
does.
the pain is the pain. So if somebody is telling you, oh, well, that's just this. No, it's not. Like, your pain is valid. Don't let anybody tell you that it's not. So to relate that back is, God doesn't see a hierarchy. It doesn't matter if you've got a broken leg or you just need a Band-Aid. Like, He's
Yeah.
willing to fix it all. So if you want to go to Him, you don't have to wait in line and say, oh, well, they suffered worse than I do. There is no waiting line for God. There's just not. Okay. So whatever you're going through, whatever pain you've got, just go. He's got it. He's got all the Band-Aids. He's got all the stuff you need.
Yeah.
Like, He can handle it all at once. Everybody's pain at once. He can deal with it. You don't got to wait.
That's awesome. Awesome advice, and I immediately go to the arena of people that are in grief, and how people process their grief differently. The same principles you're talking about is there is no one right answer when well, how do I grieve, or how do I resolve anger and whatnot. We all do it differently. The point is, do it, and
Right.
understand at the center of all that is it's the prodigal son or prodigal daughter story. Is that no matter what you've done, or how you feel, or whatnot, that God is at the center of your life, and you're never alone. So
Well,
that's
one thing I'll add to that prodigal son thing. We always talk about that story as, him returning home, right? And that it's a forgiveness story, and it is, but it's also a joy story. What does the father do when that son comes home?
yeah.
He throws a party.
Yeah.
So that's what I'm going to say too. Like, God will throw a party for you. He is waiting to do that. So, like, there's no barrier. No, it's a forgiveness story, yes, but just see that God is waiting with that joy of you. Like, again, like, He wants you back, because I tell people, and again, this is in the Joyful God book, right? Our purpose is, God, again, is God of joy, right? And our purpose is to reflect that joy back to Him. That's our purpose. Our calling, and I've said this before in other places too, our calling is just the pathway we do that, whether that's our jobs or whatever it is. So we have different callings that we can, but the purpose is always just to reflect who He is, to reflect His joy. That connection, like, joy is what He is. It's what we're supposed to have. That never is supposed to unlink. Right? It's never supposed to unlink. That's why I'm so kind of obsessed with getting it back together for people where it's broken. So
and 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 don't be the other son in the prodigal son who resented everything, and his relationship with his father was broken, but it was built on, to begin with, not joy and love for his father, but obligation as, well, I'm the son, I have to do this kind of deals. And that's one of the things I think in some of the scriptures that we fail to realize is in the parables, Christ has given us the answer and the consequence.
Hmm.
if you don't
Yeah.
accept the answer.
Yeah. Well, that story too, like that kind of brings us full circle because if you look at what that son was doing, he wasn't using the word also. He was not
Yeah,
considering how joyful that like his father's perspective. He wasn't considering all the things that his brother might have gone through. He was just saying like my perspective is I've worked this. I've
yeah.
worked for my dad. I've done all the good things therefore.
I deserve
So
it. Yeah,
right, so he wasn't seeing that bigger picture. And
yeah.
so his dad's actions didn't make sense to him because he wasn't using that bigger perspective.
Awesome. Wanda, it was so fun to have you on today. I'm glad we were able to uh, pull this off. I know
Sure.
we had some scheduling issues and whatnot,
Yeah.
but what a great conversation. And I want to wish you a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year, even though by the time we drop this, we're going to be in the new year. But
Yeah.
have a great Christmas and
Yeah. Same to you, Pat.
keep up what you're doing. And I really encourage people check out faithontheclock.com. Go there. I just saw you on Substack. You dropped your 8 verses for the week, and it's like, oh man, we got some encouragement going on here.
Yeah.
So
So I think that one is 8 verses for holding integrity. So
there
that
you
was
go.
really good.
That
Yep.
yeah, and you're such a positive source in people's lives. So thank you for what you're doing and being obedient to that calling and the gifts that God has given you. For our listeners, I want to thank you for being here. It's because of you. We are now downloaded. We're pushing right at 4,000 downloads on 6 continents and over a dozen countries. Please like, comment, and share this episode with somebody that needs to hear this message today. If you want to learn more or have a free 30-minute consult with me on the warrior servant leader mindset and how it can impact your life, book an appointment on the warrior servant leader podcast.com. It's always there. Or like Wanda, we're connected on LinkedIn as well. And you can connect with me on LinkedIn at Pat Welsh JD. And remember, always, always strive to do the right thing at the right time, the right way, and for the right reasons, and embrace your journey as a warrior servant and leader. Love you all, and see you next week.